Hello and welcome to the Colts Cover-2 Podcast. I am Joel A. Erickson. I am joined, as always, by my coworker, Nate Atkins. Nate is still in Indianapolis, but getting ready to leave soon for the Hall of Fame ceremonies with Dwight Freeney. Freeney, obviously, player to be celebrated. We've kind of done that before here. What you guys want to hear about is training camp. So let's start here. Let's start by just saying, like, what do you look for? Like, what do you look for most in training camp? And let's just start. How do you watch training camp? What are you looking for most in training camp?
Yeah, I guess it's a little in the weeds, but I feel it's kind of interesting because you and I think, watch pretty differently the way that we split some things up. Since you do the daily observations and got to kind of pack a lot into those, I'm more going for, different. I have a daily story I'll write, and then I'm kind of developing bigger features, at different points too. And just seeing kind of what pops. So I try to focus in on something when I'm at training camp. So like when they practice on two fields, I get in these spots where I kind of hold the view, at least when I'm not supposed to track things, is that, if you try to watch everything, you watch nothing. Like I learned that a little bit ago. So I try and really zero in on something. So sometimes it's a position group. Sometimes it's just a player. Like pretty much whenever Anthony Richardson is out there, that's usually where my eyes are, that backfield, him and Jonathan Taylor. We just have never seen that. Usually it's things we haven't seen yet before. I don't watch as much on, Michael Pittman Jr. and Kenny Moore because I kind of know what those guys are. So I'm trying to learn things about situations or players that I haven't seen as much. So for me, it's a lot of rookies. Rookies are a big focus. So A.D. Mitchell, Leatu Latu. Sometimes I'll, if I'm right on a specific player I want to, I'll just zero in on that player. So, Leatu Latu might be a guy that, like, I try and watch his process when he goes out there, obviously the plays he's doing on the field, but sometimes I'll follow with my binoculars to see what he's doing on the sidelines, kind of between the plays, working with different coaches, just different things. I'm pretty much looking for things I can then go create a conversation with that player about, and then learn a little bit more about it, the things he's working on, the challenges, what's new, what's coming easy, what's coming hard. So I try to get some stories out like that. But yeah, I mean, it's most, it also depends on the timing. So early practices, I'm looking more at like the passing game. When the pads come on, then you can start to understand the line play a little bit more and try to get some takes off that. And I mean, the one thing that is just an absolute highlight though is the one-on-one drills between either wide receiver and DB or just the linemen, which just started up with the pads coming on. So whenever those are going on, I'm very attuned to that. And again, same kind of thing, use the binoculars, just try and watch like the before and after. So when A.D. Mitchell does a one-on-one rep, you're obviously watching the rep, but I'm trying to watch like what he does immediately after. Does he go and talk to his quarterback? Does he talk to his fellow receivers? Does he talk to Reggie Wayne? Does he talk to Jim Bob Cooter? And then try and follow up with those people. So it's just kind of ways to get starting points to conversations later on. While also, obviously, in the course of that, you build enough of your own observations that, the way we split it up, my observations are like 10 thoughts on a week of practice. So I'm taking notes on these things, but it's less of like a play-by-play, and it's more of like things that are jumping out, new observations, things that are surprising me or backing up certain opinions I already have, and just kind of at the end of the week add it up and just see I try to take a bigger picture look at it, where less than just what happened in one day versus I'm trying to look at what happened over the course of 5 days, what's consistently happening or not happening, and try to go from there.
Yeah. From a daily observation standpoint, I think the biggest, the governing principle for me is I'm trying to figure out what the roster is going to look like. And that's why you're going to see in my observations, you're going to see mentions of, and I not just the 53 man, but also the practice squad, because, I know no one thinks about it, but those players end up mattering later on. And so I like to have some kind of, it's hard. I like to try to have some kind of thought or note on about 75 guys. There's usually about 15 guys on the roster that are what you'd call a camp body for a lack of a better way to put it. But I'm trying to have some kind of thought on how the team views or how one of those players is playing for 75 guys, because and the reason it's centered around the 53-man roster is I don't think you can actually predict how someone's season is going to go based on training camp. I've been in training camps where a rookie receiver looked awesome and then had one of the greatest seasons in the history of rookies in the NFL. That'd be Michael Thomas when I covered the Saints. I've covered plenty of rookies with the Colts who had good training camps and didn't do, and people were furious at them after the season and furious at us for saying that they look good at all. So I'm not really trying to do that. What I'm really trying to do is figure out who is this, and like who are these? Who are the guys that the team thinks coming out of training camp are the ones to go with, and what might that mean going forward? So that's kind of the way it governs. I'm very much trying to look beyond just the top couple guys. Usually that's the topper of the observations is one of the starters, but I'm usually trying to look beyond that and give you a little more on some of the other position battles, that kind of thing. Just because that's what the team is trying to do right now. The team right now is trying to figure out their 53. Yes, they're preparing for the season, but it's not like they go into practice with Shane Steichen going, I'm going to expose Gus Bradley's defense today, and I'm going to pick every weakness in it. We're only going to run those plays. That's not the way the practice works. They go in with, they want to work on red zone. They want to work on this package or that page of the playbook or whatever. And that's what they do regardless of what the defense is doing. So that's how I do it. I think for the most part, I think the misconception from some people is where some of the stuff goes wrong. Like people will always say, like, remember when Deion Kane looked really good in camp and then he did nothing in the regular season? Well, yes, I do remember that. But my defense to that is the Colts also thought that season that Deion Kane had a good training camp because they gave him like 400 snaps before they finally decided midseason, this is not working out. This isn't the player we thought he was in training camp. So, or another one is like Nick Cross a couple years ago when he was a rookie free safety. Like we kept saying, like, he's flashing in camp. They started him at strong safety and then quickly found out that they didn't want to do that. But they did start him and play him 70 plays in the opener. So you look at it more as what you just said. It's a day-by-day report. There will be stuff in those day-by-day reports where as we go further on, I'll put more context into it. Like yesterday's, we're recording this on Thursday. This was Wednesday, so it was 5th day of practice. And it was Alec Pierce's big day. But I also put in there like how many catches Pierce has in 11 on 11s versus how many catches A.D. Mitchell has in 11 on 11s to give you bigger context. But yeah, it's all geared towards who's going to make the 53-man roster. And in some cases, are we not seeing something from a certain position battle that we thought we were going to see? Position battles, I think, is a good way to kind of frame this podcast. We're going to start from some of the ones that people care about less and get to the big ones at the end. I'm going to throw this out. I have some concerns about running back behind Jonathan Taylor. I don't know that anyone so far has like really popped in a way that makes me think this is a guy they can really count on if Taylor goes down. Yeah. Do you have anything contrary to that?
No, I mean, I will say with the running backs that, like, I want to see it play out a little bit more with pads on. It's a big thing Jim Bob Cooter always harps on is you can't judge the running backs without pads on. So they've been
every coach in the NFL. That's like their favorite thing.
Yeah,
you can't judge it without pads.
So there is something to that. I think like a guy like Trey Sermon, he's a physical player. So there's a certain element of his game we're not going to see as much in these settings. It's set up theoretically more for a guy like Tyler Goodson or Evan Hull, who are kind of your receiver types more than kind of your physical between the tackle runners. But yeah, there haven't been flashes from those guys. There's been some moments that didn't look great. Tyler Goodson, that was more of he struggled with the kick returning, and we're talking about running back here, but it's just sort of like these are guys without track records who aren't kind of showing anything new yet. So there's still time. Joint practices and preseason games are more interesting for that position, but those guys face the burden of proof because they haven't done it yet. I mean, Trey Sermon is the most accomplished of those guys, and we're talking about a guy who has 346 career yards. He ran in 3 teams, and he ran reasonably well last year. And the one thing I'll say in his favor that I think will be interesting is he did not get to play with Anthony Richardson, so he's not gotten that bump from playing with the mobile quarterback and the way that Anthony can kind of freeze the defensive end and give an extra blocker and all of that. So to average 4.6 yards a carry on 35 carries last year without Anthony, I thought was a decent sign. But that's just such a small sample without, again, he kind of had one big game in there when they ran kind of crazy on the Steelers. That's all. We pretty much have one game for these 3 running backs combined to point to, and it was one game where Tyler Goodson and Trey Sermon went off. And I do think this is an underrated need because, obviously Jonathan Taylor is the guy until he's not out there. And Jonathan Taylor has missed 8 games to injury over the past 2 seasons. And this team's going to want to run a lot. That's what they keep alluding to, is how much they want to run the ball. Well, when Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson are out there, I think it could be one of the most electric backfields we've ever seen. But obviously an injury to either one's a problem. But with Jonathan, if he goes down, or even just the times when he has to take a series off, you don't want a situation where now it's the whole defense is just worried about Anthony and they're going to converge, and you almost kind of lose the effect of Anthony's athleticism if they're just going to force him to hand the ball off all the time. Or, you don't want to get to a point where you're now running Anthony more than you plan to because you don't have Jonathan Taylor, but that's kind of the skill set of your offense is still in the run game. I could see it going wrong if Jonathan had to miss, a month of the season, which each of the last 2 years he's had an injury that's taken him out for about that long, the thumb last year and the ankle the year before. So yeah, it's a spot that I know they would have liked. They wanted Zach Moss back, but he wanted to go be a starter. That made sense. I still believe they wanted to draft Trey Benson out of Florida State based on the way that things were falling and how much they raved about him. And then once he was gone between the draft class and free agency, it's been hard to find good alternatives. This is what's very different than another position we'll talk about where there are good alternatives. But at running back, it's been hard to find many alternatives out there that they should go for. So this is kind of their group right now. But yeah, I wouldn't feel great at the moment when Jonathan Taylor has to go out of the game.
The thing that gets me so far is just that there's a lack of suddenness from Sermon and Hall in particular. When they're going through the hole, there's a suddenness to Jonathan Taylor's game. I know I shouldn't compare them to Jonathan Taylor, but that's who's on the field in front of them. That there's a significant gap, I think, between him and those two. Tyler Goodson does have the suddenness. He's got less size than anybody else. He's like Evan Hall is not a big dude, but he's kind of compactly, thickly built. I think with Hall, the thing that sticks out is there's been some drop issues. That's probably not good for. I almost think though that the way they've set this up, it's pretty much already set with the top 2 spots, and it's just Tyler Goodson versus Evan Hall for the pass catching back. I find it hard to believe that either of those 2 players would overtake Sermon at this point. I mean, it's only 5 days in, but it just seems like they set it up that way. But I will say this, that's the biggest thing for me. There's a lack of suddenness, and there have been some drop issues. There have been some mistake issues. Goodson has fumbled, which you shouldn't fumble in this because people aren't really tackling you. There's been a couple of hiccups for those guys. And then with Sermon, there hasn't really been a hiccup per se. It's just he doesn't really catch passes in practice. He's not super quick when he plants his foot and decides to go. I mean, maybe he doesn't have to be that, but it doesn't. I'll say this: it didn't look like Zach Moss in practice.
No, and that's like Zach Moss was. That's the thing about why I think it's an underrated need is I think he was an underrated player last year. He did way more than I think any of us expected. I think Zach Moss last year he had 183 carries, nearly hit 800 yards, and averaged 4.3 a carry. You're not going to need as much out of that role. It's not the same thing with Jonathan Taylor holding out for the first month of the season, but you could, there could be an injury, and then all of a sudden you do need more of that. And again, the argument is like, well, you have Anthony, and that'll be a mouth in the backfield. But again, you want to run him to the extent of tapping into his upside, and not just out of necessity because there's no one else who can carry the ball. And that's why I do think that those Sermon Hull and Goodson are competing for that passing down back because that's their skill set. And Trey Sermon, I just can't see them unseating Trey Sermon as a runner. And that runner role is still going to be needed for the occasional break for Jonathan Taylor. And then, like I said, when he goes out. So, yeah, they're just – it's kind of like another position we'll get to where the guys that we're talking about have – like they're specialists. They're good at one specific area of the job. So maybe it'll come together where they can split that up and be effective that way. But yeah, need to see more out of them for sure.
One of the other positions Chris Ballard mentioned was swing tackle. I don't think there's it's only 5 days in. They've only been in pads for 2. So I don't think this one should have changed much by now. But Blake Freeland is pretty clearly ahead of Matt Gonzalez at this point.
Yeah.
There's not much to say here because they've only been in pads for a little bit. But
yeah, there's not. It's just that like Blake Freeland you're hoping getting some of the bump that Bernard Ryman got from being thrown in the way he was as a rookie, where Blake Freeland did not play very well last year, but it was a tough spot thrown in as a rookie trying to start at 2 different positions at very difficult positions. Your hope is that like this year, he's just got more confidence. He does look a little bigger. I'd be curious to see how much weight he put on because I noticed that's something he needed. But pretty much, I think they're just wanting to see him kind of step in and carry over some of the things he learned. And good signs so far. Matt Gonzalez, he's more like he's starting from ground zero, and they're going to cross train him and Tanner Bornolini to a couple different positions, and so that's going to kind of take the eye off the ball of being a tackle and beating Blake Freeland out, who's just a tackle. So yeah, I don't think that one's so much competition.
We'll see with that one.
Very Chris Ballard, though, that we ask about position battles, and he goes to swing tackle and backup Mike. Like that is how he operates. He just loves like every little nook and cranny of the roster.
Backup Mike. I don't know about backup Mike because I think the way the linebacker room actually works out is there's 2 guys who are going to play all the time. We know who those are. Mm-hmm. That's Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed. And then there's a third player who I think of as the third linebacker, barring a Zaire Franklin injury. And he was out with a hip. So this is the one thing that could change it is if he's out for a while with a hip. I think Jalen Carlisle is the third linebacker. I think he's the third linebacker right now.
Oh yeah. I completely agree.
When he's been on the field, he's kind of flashed every day. I asked Cato June about it the other day. He did not tell me I was wrong. He didn't talk about other players. He said, yeah, we really like him. And here's the other thing. When he's played with the ones, which I think is a big deal for a 1st-round pick or 5th-round pick, to get playing time with the ones that early in camp, he was playing the will, and EJ Speed was sliding over to the Otto. And Otto is strong side linebacker terminology in Gus Bradley's defense. That gives a pretty easy way to get him on the field. I think he's third. I don't really think there's any question about that, with the exception of that Zaire Franklin role is more physical, more taking on blocks, more of all that stuff. And I don't know if they'd put Carlisle in there.
No, I don't think
so. I actually think if Zaire goes down, there's not a great option to take over. Like if Zaire goes down for an extended length of time, I don't love my options there right now because EJ doesn't really play that role either.
That was kind of interesting. When I did the list of the most essential Colts, I felt like I had to get Zaire Franklin on there, but it was hard to exactly figure out where. But it's interesting with him is like, I'm not sure if he's going to be able to add this. He talks a lot about adding splash plays. That would be his next step. We'll see if he can do that. But the floor for him is so high as a leader, and guys led the league and led them in tackling 2 straight years. So I do think like Shaguna Luby is probably going to be his backup again. But yeah, Jalen Carlisle is barring this injury being something bad, I think definitely going to be that starter in that role because it's a limited role. It fits his skill set.
It's like 200, 300 snaps.
Yeah. And also, right after they drafted Jalen Carlisle, they asked Ronnie Harrison to become a full-time safety. So that, to me, tells you something about their vision for Jalen Carlisle. They've hit so well on linebackers drafting it. They can operate with that confidence, and we don't have to scrutinize them baking on a drafted player like at that position like I'm about to at a different position. But, yeah, I think Jalen Carlisle has a clear role, and he's been impressive so far. It's a transition from safety, but yeah, I think he's got that spot.
One of the other pieces with the linebacker spot, like if you can have, because they drafted him because they felt like he could already do the coverage stuff that's hard to find at linebacker. If you can have that guy on the field in base defense, a lot of teams go base personnel offensively to create shots and to throw the ball out of heavy personnel when the defense is in, disadvantaged positions. Really, really nice to have one of your linebackers be a converted safety in that when teams are trying to do that to you. I think they probably know that. They just wanted to see if he could play, and from what we've seen so far, he can. Okay, those are the ones Ballard got out of the way that I know most people probably aren't paying close attention to. We can move on to some of the bigger ones now. So Chris Ballard, I believe, did not mention wide receiver when he started talking about position battles. And I
think he did.
And I have a theory as to why. Because they're both going to play. Both players are going to play. Alec Pierce and A.D. Mitchell are going to play, and the game targets will manifest themselves however they manifest themselves.
Which is also why he didn't mention defensive end, where at the time they had Samson Ebicom and Laiatu Latu and Kwity Paye. That's 3 guys, and there's 2 positions. But they were all going to play. Unfortunately, Samson Ebicom went down. So now Laiatu Latu probably will play a lot more. But anyway, that's the nature of certain positions is that it's supposed to be split up to a point. Obviously, Michael Pittman Jr. is going to play all the time at his wide receiver spot, but that's why you paid him $3 years and $70 million. Some wide receiver spots are just going to be split up in nature. It's different than how they played last year because they just had the same 3 guys for every game except for one and played them every snap. Ashton Dillon went down. There were no depth options whatsoever to even think about playing over Alec Pierce. A.D. Mitchell, second-round investment. That's going to be a different thing. I will say, though, I think there has been expectation that he was going to surge past Alec Pierce. So far,
in certain corners of the internet, he's already surpassed Michael Pittman Jr.
That's right. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, he's surpassed Marvin Harrison Jr. in some of those corners of the internet.
I'm deliberately tempting Nate right now.
You are. Yeah, I mean, I think there's some people who are ready to move on from Alec Pierce, but the Colts aren't, and they shouldn't be based on like the fact that they didn't have the big arm quarterback, and now they do. They've got 2 of them, and so as long as that's true, they're going to need a player who can fly down the field, work off play action, create some shot plays. And I think that role, though, that it's like the X receiver spot in this offense, even though Pittman's the Z, but he's like the go-to guy. That it's the third receiver after Pittman and Downs. It's a low volume role. I just don't see a lot of targets going to either Alec Pierce or A.D. Mitchell, unless one of them just explodes and is way better than any of us saw coming, which again, according to those corners of the internet, that's impossible because you can't surpass Jerry Rice, I don't think. And that's where he's at in some of those corners. But unless we get like absolutely blown away by one of these guys, they're going to be deep in the pecking order. Because you think about it, this offense is going to run a lot. Jonathan Taylor, Anthony Richardson, they're going to run a lot. When they pass, Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs are just big-time target guys. You just see it in practice. You saw it last year on the field. Those are the guys that have proven it. And then after that, we'll see if the tight ends factor in. They were kind of a hodgepodge unit last year without Jelani Woods. If they do, though, that's just going to cut into that number 3 spot even more. There just aren't many targets to go around. And I think the nature of that X spot in this offense is more about those shot plays, more about kind of those low percentage, deep down the field routes that are not always going to be the shots you're taking. And then that role is also it's just going to have to run some kind of good, crisp, deep routes to fit the spacing of getting all these other players open and force feeding some of them. And then a blocking role too, because they're going to run so much. And that's where Alec Pierce, in those other areas, I think he should have the advantage over A.D. Mitchell because he's played. His routes are going to be a little bit more diverse and maybe not diverse is not the right term, but crisp in the terms of the ones he's asked to do. And then he's a good blocker. He gets after it. He's got good technique. He's added a little bit of weight this offseason. So he's ahead of A.D. Mitchell in some of the areas they're going to really look toward out of that position. A.D. Mitchell was awesome in the OTAs, and we said at the time he looked awesome, but take it with a grain of salt. It's non-contact and it's some weird matchups. And now that he's in training camp and there's some contact and he's going up against the first team, he's not flashing the same way. And it doesn't mean anything to me about his career, but I think what it does show you is like Alec Pierce looks ahead. They're both going to play a lot, but it doesn't at all look like, the only route for them to not play a lot was A.D. Mitchell comes in and is just as good as those corners of the internet say he is, and that was probably not possible. So I think they're both going to play.
One caveat with the wide receivers, oftentimes veteran receivers have an advantage over younger ones because they're installing right now and the rookie receivers' heads are swimming. So it can still change, but that's what we're seeing so far. Tight end. Is tight end a position battle? The way we traditionally think of as a position battle? Because I don't know about that.
Well, it depends on how much you want to read into what they're like. Right now, they've not been playing Jelani Woods a lot with the first team, but I think they will be. So it's just a bit like it's a battle in terms of if you actually think that like he has to supplant those guys, if he has to supplant Mo Alley Cox. I think it's more, though, to me, it's just Jelani Woods has basically never practiced in this playbook. I mean, he basically barely did anything last year in the summer. With that's when the hamstring injury started, and he never came back. He never had a practice after that. So the install stuff is like he's like a rookie in terms of that with this specific scheme, and he's trying to get back after missing a whole year of activity and all that. So it's just sort of naturally easing him in a little bit. Plus, sometimes, like you said, when they're focused on certain parts of their game, when they're focusing on like the red zone or certain aspects of the run game, they're going to go to Mo Alley Cox and Drew Ogletree. One of them is going to be the blocker. I think that'll be interesting. The only battle I think is, I think they end up keeping 4 tight ends, and they have 5. So it's a battle in terms of the 53-man roster. But as far as in the battle, I guess within that would be Ogletree versus Mo Alley Cox for the blocking role. But beyond that, I think, or I guess the other battle could does Kylan Granson have to save a spot? Like, is Will Mallory good enough to sort of think about moving on there? So down the depth chart, some battles. But as far as the first team, it's Jelani Woods unless he gets hurt, I think. That is, to me, the only one here who's going to show that upside of the run and pass game as the inline tight end. He's the only one that has that kind of upside, and they've just been waiting for him to get out there. He's out there. I thought he looked a little bit more comfortable yesterday, but he's had some ups and downs like young tight ends do. So they just really need him to take off and earn it. So it's kind of like the battle is Jelani Woods against his own potential.
That brings us to the battles that are, I think, a little bit more real. And we'll start with cornerback. Outside corner. I've got something coming on Jalen Simpson soon. It might be up by the time you guys hear this, but I want to make clear, I don't think that you're seeing anything with him yet where it's like he's going to challenge one of the top 3 guys. He just looks like a corner, which is good for somebody who played safety last year for their depth. The 3 guys we're talking about are Juju Brents, Jalen Jones, and Dallas Flowers. I will say this. Not a lot of splash plays from those 3 players so far yet.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of plays in general from them so far yet. The one guy in the secondary who looks really, really good is strong safety Julian Blackmon, and we'll get to him a little bit when we start talking about the last position on our list. But not a ton of plays so far. I do know it's a battle, though, because they do keep rotating him. It's been mostly Juju Brents and Jalen Jones, the first team, but Dallas Flowers has gotten a few chances, too.
Yeah, Dallas Flowers is the one he's trying to catch up to them because he didn't start, or because those guys finished the year as the starters, and also Dallas Flowers coming off the Achilles tear. So, Dallas Flowers' game is built on just outrageous athleticism. So there's a level he has to get back to be the type of player that he can be. But really, I mean, that battle, that would be, I think, Dallas Flowers against Jalen Jones, because Juju is the second-round investment. Juju's just a battle of, can he stay on the field? Can he get over the injuries? It's kind of crazy to think since he got drafted, he's had wrist surgery, two separate hamstring injuries. I guess they're kind of connected, but it was a re-injury. And then a severe quad injury, and then another ankle injury that led to a procedure in June. The good thing is that he bounced back well from the June one. They didn't know if he would start camp. He started it. He's not had any injury issues so far. 5 practices in. He's very confident that his offseason work, he got a lot of advice from people down in, he's got like a trainer in Florida, mostly stayed up here though, but they kind of laid out a new plan for him that he believes in. But I think he's the top outside corner. It's Dallas versus Jalen for the other spot. And I really think that's more like, I think that's Jalen Jones's spot unless he loses it, just based on, they talked him up a lot. He's the one who's played a lot, played all 17 games last year. He's been the one that started camp that way. The guy behind him is coming off an Achilles tear. So it's more like, I think it's his spot until, we have to see it play out second year for him. Can he hold on to it? He is in a spot that's very similar to me of the 7th round pick the year before, Rodney Thomas, who became a starter as a rookie. Next year had that starting spot, but he couldn't end up holding on to it. They went to Nick Cross late in the year because sometimes things catch up. So Jalen Jones has to prove he's that player they saw moments last year, and he can build on that and improve and hold the job.
Yeah, this one, that I just keep thinking with Dallas Flowers, his Achilles, in terms of him getting back onto the field and being able to play football, he's done a really good job of that. But usually with these guys, they end up admitting at some point that the Achilles tendon the Achilles tendon repair has cost them something for the first year of recovery. And Flowers hasn't said that. Who knows if he'll admit it? I just know pretty much every time this has happened in the past, that's been the case. Blackmon said it. Eric Fisher said it. Dio said it. Marlon Mack wasn't the same player.
Blackmon's a great comp for that because another super athletic player, same position group, and he didn't flash in 2022 the way that.
No, he was. If you look at his 2022, I mean, he bounced around. He played nickel some. He played safety some. It was a very, very different player than the one that was, frankly, very, very good for them last year, and the one who's been great in training camp. Julian Blackmon, the one guy in the secondary you can definitively say has made a ton of plays so far, is Julian Blackmon. Kenny Moore has been having a really fun to watch battle with Josh Downs, where they each kind of win like a couple things of practice, but Downs is having a really good camp. Julian Blackmon has now, I think, 3 times made plays on the ball when I'm not entirely sure he has any business being where he is. He's just made it, like, based on the coverage is what I mean. Like, that's not necessarily his zone, but he's just done a really good job of reading things and getting back in it and then making an acrobatic play on the ball. So
yeah, he's been awesome. He's building on everything he did last year. There's a play against the Browns that he had laid out for me about how he communicated something last second and just like dead on sprint to a new zone and picked off PJ Walker. And that's the stuff we're seeing on a daily basis right now. He just seems like his mind's moving faster than everybody else's. His body is moving faster than everybody else's. The further he gets from his Achilles tear, and then you add in the experience level he got in a new role at strong safety, it seems like it's all coming together. And it's one of those interesting things that they got him for 1 year and $7 million, and he kind of sat out there because he just was. They want to see more of it, but like it's weird to think about because the player we see out there, I'm just like, this is a fantastic player who had a great contract year last year, didn't see any rewards for it. So you'd hope for his case that if he's able to do that again this year and lead them in picks and pass breakups like he did last year, like you'd like to see a reward come to a player like that because he's really, really turning into a high level. I mean, he looks like a Pro Bowl type player out there, which is not what you can say for a lot of guys in the secondary.
Yeah, and it's kind of important because the last position battle that we have on our list is free safety. I said this going in with our 5 position battles to watch. We've talked about it since then, but I think it's worth reiterating. I think free safety is a more important position battle than corner because in this defense, and I was just listening to, when I was working on my Jalen Simpson story, I was listening to defensive backs coach Ron Milas say this again. Like, if they have the right free safety, it changes everything for those corners and how they play. If they were in a cover 0 defense, then I think corner would maybe be more important. But like the success of those corners is very dependent on whether or not Nick Cross. I mean, basically so far in camp, it's pretty much been Nick Cross with some Ronnie Harrison sprinkled in, right? There has not been a ton of Rodney Thomas on the first team.
No, he's been definitively second team so far.
So, like, they're basically counting on Nick Cross. And how do we know that? Well, as you so poignantly pointed out in a story this week, Ronnie Harrison's not a free safety.
You know, the last time that Ronnie Harrison played free safety in a game, the Colts were in the AFC Championship game. Barack Obama was president. Shane Steichen was a quality control coach of the Chargers. Gus Bradley was leading the Legion of Boom secondary to what they hoped was a second straight Super Bowl. And Anthony Richardson was in youth football. 2014 is a long time ago. So
that last one hurts. That last one. Actually, you know what? The last time Ronnie Harrison played free safety, I had no kids.
Wow. And the last time he played free safety, I had just graduated college that year.
My oldest just turned 8 this week, and he was not around the last time Ronnie Harrison played free safety.
Yeah, I asked if he's ever played it in an NFL game, and he said there's been a couple of looks with the Browns that felt like he was in the free safety mindset, but no, not. And in Alabama, he was definitely, that was a very strict system under Nick Saban. So I don't know, it's interesting. Like Ronnie Harrison, it's just been an interesting past year for him where the league moved on from him as a strong safety. Colts asked him to play linebacker. He didn't really have other options, so he said, sure, I'll do it. Kind of, filled in nicely for Shaquille Leonard after that fell apart, and he had picks in 2 of his first 3 games. And then, Julian Blackmon gets hurt, and they asked him to play strong safety again. They liked what they saw there. And this is a player that early on, he was drafted in the 3rd round, former, big-time recruit that went to Alabama. Early on in the NFL, he was this super athletic player, but he needed a lot of experience. He needed to grow in terms of understanding roles, and he just needed playing experience to kind of catch up the mental to the physical. And now that he's played a lot of different positions, they believe he can kind of see the defense differently. It's a big thing that's helped Julian Blackmon too. So I can see why they're giving him some run. It's like why they want to cross train him at free safety, especially when they have such depth concerns at these spots. But that should not be factoring into a competition at this position. Just like Nick Cross, he's in the same spot that I just described for Juju Brents and Jelani Woods, where the battle should be him against himself. Like, the battle should be Nick Cross has to take this by the horns and run away with it. And it's not happened so far at all. And I think he's practicing a little better the past few days than maybe early on. So you hope that it's like he's coming along, but it's slow. There's not flashes. He's not really making plays out there. He's starting to get to the right spots, but like, he can't just be a guy. This position cannot just be one of, well, he's the guy up, we'll give it to him and we'll evaluate him this season and see where it goes. This is a very different year than last year when that was the mindset. It was young players, first year, new coach, transitions, all that. This year, they're coming off a year where they're 30 yards short of winning an AFC South title. And so I don't understand. I continue to not understand what they're doing at free safety, other than it feels like Chris Ballard in the front office, they just want to get it right on a draft pick that at this point it's been 3 years. It's Nick Cross is his third training camp. And I just wonder how much more there is to evaluate. The only evaluation I think should be, the evaluation should be Nick Cross versus guys who are on the free agent market. And do we need to level up and go get Quandre Diggs or Justin Simmons? I don't see how there's any there should not be any evaluation of, is Nick Cross better than Rodney Thomas or a safety who last played safety before your kids were born? Like, that should not be the evaluation going on right now. But that's how they talk about it. Because I asked Gus Bradley yesterday, and he said, you look at the exact quote here. He said, it's one of the positions we looked at where we started to see some flashes where the execution part is there. So now when you see them play with good execution, you can judge their speed then. They're not thinking as much. We've got some work to do in the evaluation, but it's going in the right direction. You know what he didn't say? Here are the players who are flashing, because they're not. And that's a problem. I think this is a huge concern right now. If they don't go out and sign somebody, Nick Cross has got to take like a dramatic leap, and he's got 7 practices to do it in training camp before we get to a point where he's back there week 1 against CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs. And the last time he was against those guys without Stephon Diggs, it didn't go well. So like something's got to change.
Chris Ballard loves to give his guys, the guys he drafted, chances. And they traded up for Nick Cross. They've been big believers in his potential. Yeah, that's kind of where we are there. I think everything you've said, everything we've said about the opportunity that some of those veterans give you to cover for a very young cornerback trio is real and correct. I think there's also probably a reality that if you bring that player in, you're kind of giving up on Nick Cross, if not outright giving up on Nick Cross, because 3 years. But by 3 years in, even when Chris Ballard says you have to wait, 3 years in is starting to be decision time on contracts and stuff like that. So it would be, with all of these third-year guys, there is a hammer at the end, depending on how this season goes. So maybe they feel like they want to give him that shot to earn it. At the same time, what if Julian Blackmon goes down?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if Julian Blackmon goes down, I think the replacement is probably most obviously Ronnie Harrison. Which maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. Before he was with the Colts last year, he was kind of out of football-ish, on it, like right on the edge of it. They brought him back as a linebacker last year. It worked for a couple games, but would it work for the whole season? I don't know. There's a lot riding on Nick Cross right now. There's a lot riding on Nick Cross and Julian Blackmon's health. And if Julian Blackmon stays healthy, if he can replicate what he did in terms of playing 15 games, maybe it's not as big a deal, but it still is a big deal just because of how we started this out. Like, this defense is not a man defense. This is a zone defense for the most part, or it's, man match looks with safeties over the top. And because of that position is very, very important. And yeah, it could change a whole lot if it doesn't work out. If it does work out, then I'm sure Chris Ballard will tell us that we missed everything on Nick Cross at the end of this. But it's free safety is a position I think we're all watching. And one of the things I will say, it is very difficult. So we watch training camp from the sidelines. And it is difficult to see coverages from the side view of a sideline. So at least I think it's harder than it is from up top. I have thought there have been some plays, especially early on, like the first 3 days, Josh Downs type plays are the ones that stick out to me, where I thought maybe the free safety should have been in position to make the play. It's hard to know that for sure. Like you said, though, the buzzword that just keeps coming out is consistency. And that's the reason is pretty simple. They have to know, if you're calling zone coverages and you have help over the top, you have to know that help is going to be there to play it properly.
And look, Nick can absolutely do this. The skills are all there for him to be a really good free safety. It's why they trade a future third-round pick for him. When he came in, he was the youngest player on any NFL roster. They pretty much took him. It should have been a redshirt year. They kind of rushed him in, and that's been part of the issue, is that I think he's always still working back from some of the trust issues that developed early on when he was not dialed in and didn't understand the game the right way back at the start of the 2022 season. But we're talking about a player that I just pulled up his relative athletic score. It's a 9.87. And in the 40-yard dash, he ran a 4.34. That is 9.99. I mean, the speed he has to be a single high free safety. If you're going to play single high, that guy's got to be a super rangy. And Earl Thomas was like, he made that defense work. Well, Nick Cross on a speed level has that ability. It's just like we can't keep going back, though, to combine testing and stuff that happened at Maryland. At some point, we've got to see it out here. And maybe they've messed it up with Nick. That's possible, because I thought like they should have gone to him a little earlier last year when they were struggling with Rodney Thomas. But they didn't until Julian Blackmon got hurt. Well, that was more, they did bench Nick Cross or Rodney Thomas, and they replaced Blackmon with Ronnie Harrison. But either way, Nick Cross has started 2 of his past 32 games in the NFL. And so to come in this year and now he's splitting first-team reps, he just hasn't gotten a lot of run. And someone's letting somebody down in that process. Either the coaches are not giving him that runway to develop that he has earned, or he's not earning it, and other players kind of are. And so it's hard to fully know from our standpoint. All I know, though, is that they don't – what we see and what we hear and what – it doesn't sound super confident. And here's my thing about it is that, let's say this works out for Nick. Let's say Nick Cross does take the bull by the horns and gets that job, and he has a very nice year, and it's like he hits it. That's entirely possible. I still think they're in deep trouble if Julian Blackmon or Kenny Moore gets hurt, even if that happens, because now you're dealing with, if Julian Blackmon goes hurt, even if Nick Cross is playing pretty well, he's still basically a first-year starter. And then you're using a former, kind of versatile backup in Ronnie Harrison to be that strong safety with super young corners. If Kenny Moore goes down, it's Mike Abraham probably stepping in, unless they want to use Nick Cross there. He's trained a little bit at nickel. Either way, you're losing all of the benefits of Kenny Moore's experience and understanding and all that stuff that's supposed to help out those young corners on the outside. The depth here is as concerning as anything else. It's just very strange that across the entire secondary, they've signed 0 veterans. That part. And at other positions, they signed a veteran backup quarterback. They signed a veteran backup defensive tackle.
They have like 4 backup veteran defensive tackles.
Yeah. Like there's some positions where they're like, hey, we're not going to get stuck in that spot. And I commend them for it because last year, like the run defense fell completely off a cliff when Grover Stewart went down. So they added Raekwon Davis, paid more for a backup defensive tackle than I think a lot of teams would, but they didn't want to mess up. And I respect them for doing that. They don't want to do that in the secondary at all. And it's such a critical position in this NFL and this AFC and this schedule where they're going to go up against Josh Allen and Tua and Jordan Love and CJ Stroud and Trevor Lawrence and on and on and on. And then if they make the playoffs, that's all they're going to face is the monster quarterbacks. And I just don't know how they're setting themselves up to do this. And it's just very strange to me when there is not just one, but 2 very easy solutions sitting out there in Quandre Diggs and Justin Simmons, who have combined for 5 Pro Bowls, who are huge time leaders. I mean, those like their teammates have always wanted to go to war with them. I covered Quandre in Detroit, and then Justin Simmons is one of the best reputations in the league as one of the top leaders. They feel like the perfect guy to drop into a young secondary if you want to live young at some other positions like those 2 outside corner spots. I think it'd be a great situation if you have Julian Blackmon and a Pro Bowl leader as your safeties. You can be just about as young as you want at those outside spots. I mean, that doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, but you can live that way and it can really work out. That's kind of how those Seahawks defenses at times work. They had, Richard Sherman is the exception there, obviously, but some of those other 2 corner spots would be very young at times. Gus Bradley's built his defense, so a couple spots like that, you can step in as young players when you're insulated by like highly experienced ones. They had that set up, a couple years ago. They had more of it with Rodney McLeod. That's when Julian Blackmon was kind of working back from his Achilles tear. But I don't know. It's just very weird to me that like at some point Justin Simmons and Quandre Diggs are going to sign with teams. They're going to be starting free safeties this year. They're probably going to be good teams because they can be. That's kind of what they're waiting for, a team that wants to make the playoffs that's going to kind of make this move. And I think if you made lists of the teams that fit them, I cannot think of a team that fits them more than the Colts, who have $25 million available and are financially flexible for a few years to come because of a rookie quarterback deal. It just feels really stubborn and confusing at this point.
One thing to note, Nate used the idiom taking the bull by the horns. And as a Colt-centric podcast, you might think he should have said take the colt by the bridle.
Oh.
But he's talking about a safety taking the bull by the horns. And the Texans are bulls.
That's right. Now you see where I was going with all that.
Mm-hmm. So just in case you were unsure where he was going, he was being very literal with it. The Colts need somebody who will, in the opener, will take Nico Collins by the horns.
And see, we have
and keep him from getting a 75-yard touchdown.
Farmer Joel here is here to set us straight in a lot of this. And so when we have that rooster come visit us in the media room,
I don't know anything about chickens. I grew up on a dairy farm. We had no chickens, 0 chickens.
Dang it. We're going to have to find someone else to help us out because that guy's been threatening. That rooster is loud and
he's very close
in the window.
He's very, very, very close. If you guys, by the way, if you guys want a lighter version of some of the stuff, like some of our videos that we've been doing, we've added the what the podcast listeners are used to, the football things that gave me joy from the game podcast. Those are on our videos now that we do at the end of practice. We've had some good ones in there. Right now, the fight rankings, I think, are Michael Pittman has fought twice. Mm-hmm. Jalen Jones has fought once. EJ Speed has fought once. Zaire Franklin has fought once. And Quentin Nelson has fought once that we know for sure. So Pitt in the lead there.
He's never going to not be in the lead. That race is over.
Wide receivers don't fight linebackers.
No. Well, this one does.
Wide receivers don't fight that's not like a thing. Like Like I was thinking through like wide receiver fights. The one that comes to mind is like Andre Johnson beating the heck out of Cortland Finnegan, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like Cortland Finnegan is like a tiny defensive back, a short little defensive back. Like Pitt fought EJ Speed the other day and absolutely started the fight. They might just dial it. We might be like past like that's just Pitt, and maybe just be like Pitt, just dial it down like 10 to 20%.
Yeah, that's probably fair. It is Pitt.
As we tape this, it's 3 practices in a row with a fight. Not 3 practices for Pitt, but 3 practices in a row with a fight in practice. That's the longest streak for any Colts training camp I've covered. Unless you want to just count. Unless you want to give like extra credit for Freddie Kitchens basically telling Cleveland to fight the Colts at every turn a couple years ago.
Yeah, the fights are kind of interesting. They're like NFL players will tell you that like that's it is.
They just kind of happen. They just kind of happen. We haven't seen
happen, and then they're done. And when they're done, they're like done.
Yeah, we haven't seen anything yet that's like worth like a story or that.
I covered one fight that became something in any training camp that became something more than that day's fight, which was when Martellus Bennett chokeslammed a first-round pick and then said later that he earned it. So
I'm shocked that it was Martellus Bennett.
He got fined by the Bears for that. So
shocked, I say.
But yeah, not everyone's wired like Martellus Bennett.
Yeah. So anyway,
yeah, I like that you brought up the videos are light, and I like a lot. We try to keep a lot of the coverage in training camp somewhat light because, like you said at the beginning of this, like this isn't going to tell us everything. We're not trying to be like, oh, we saw this, so like I don't know what AD Mitchell is going to be in his career, and I don't even know what Nick Cross is going to be in his career, but
we don't know what Anthony Richardson will be.
We don't. But I think like the podcast is a place, this podcast is a way to get a little bit more on a couple of serious notes, which I do think the free safety conversation is serious because we've been having it for a year now. This isn't something where like it felt good and then we watched 2 practices of some struggles and now we're raising alarms. Raising alarms because the alarms have been screaming for the past year at that position. And last year didn't feel as critical because that year was about playing the young players, letting them develop, taking some lumps. That's what was going to happen in the secondary. That was supposed to happen with Anthony Richardson until he got hurt. This year is not supposed to be like that. This year at every other turn, every other spot on this team, the talk is a lot of confident talk about wanting to get to the playoffs and believing that they have it. And the way that they talk about every other position, I think they believe that. Even outside corner, we'll see. They may be very wrong. It's possible that Jalen Jones slides backward. It's possible Juju Brents gets hurt again. But they really like those guys, and they play them as much as they can play them since last year. Not that they had a lot of other options, but they're giving them those chances. The way they talk and act at free safety tells me they don't believe in it, and that's surprising when there are other ways to go. I'd say that.
Who do you want, Justin Simmons or Quandre Diggs? Which one do you want more?
I don't know. It's very interesting because I think like Justin.
I'm a Justin Simmons guy.
I think he's probably he's the safer, better player. Quandre had a down year last year. I don't know everything that went into it. Justin Simmons did not have a down year. He was a second-team All-Pro. I think Quandre Diggs is the one that is as much as you want to care about scheme fit. I don't think these guys are so good it doesn't apply to that much. They played a lot, but he has played more in this scheme coming from Seattle. In terms of fitting in earlier, I think Quandre Diggs could do that. They're very similar to me, though, in the sense that like they're super experienced, super durable guys who are 30, 31 years old, ball hawk players who are big-time vocal leaders. And to me, it doesn't matter as much which one. It's just pick any of them. Pick a name out of a hat and then sign him.
What if
it's
the name
normally the process that I would recommend for a team, but in this case, yes. Just do it. You won't regret it.
Oh, I didn't realize that Marcus May signed with the Dolphins. I was going to say, what if the name is Marcus May? But at some point, Marcus May signed with the Dolphins. This is one of the things that always gets me during training camp. I have no idea what's going on with the other 31 teams.
I know.
Like somebody asked me this morning about the Bears and like what was coming out of Bears training camp, and I was like, I think they play a game tonight. I don't know. Caleb Williams is the quarterback. Flus has a beard. I know that. Flus has a beard.
Flus has a beard. Yeah, I'm trying to look at
nicely coiffed hair.
I'm trying to look at who is still available at safety other than them. But honestly, it should not really matter.
Well, there's your answer.
Why should we be getting beyond these two guys that are Pro Bowlers and they're sitting out there? Like,
there's the answer to my question.
The worst thing they could do than sign nobody is to sign someone other than them. Actually, I don't know if it'd be worse, but it'd look weird.
If the Colts lose the opener and C.J. Stroud throws for more than 250 yards, you, the listener, could write Nate's column for him that day.
Actually, the easiest thing would be if an AFC South team signs one of these guys. Then we can just go ask them about it. I don't know. Look, it would be fun to cover a situation where Nick Cross has a breakout year. I've talked to Nick a ton. I was trying to get at that story last year, thinking that they were about to play him. So whatever happens can be fun, but it's just like it's dangerous. It's like it's a certain position. It's different than like I don't know, if they had a messy linebacker situation. Even like when Grover Stewart was out, they couldn't stop the run. They still could win. Like those are not premium areas the way that giving up explosive pass plays is. And so I don't know. They're playing with fire. It's just one of those things where like we talk about, Chris Ballard does this every year where he has a position group that he's going to risk it all in terms of playing the young guys. It works out more than we on this podcast initially think is going to, like with the offensive line last year. That worked out great. When it doesn't work, it tends to not miss by just a little bit, be underwhelming. It tends to be really bad. Think tight end and offensive line 2 years ago. Outside cornerback last year where they're playing Tony Brown against the Saints. That kind of situation. It gets like the floor gets pretty low. And I think in this specific situation, if it goes wrongly enough, an injury or two to Julian Blackmon or Kenny Moore, who, by the way, have missed 30 combined games in their careers. They've had long careers. They've been mostly, I mean, Kenny's become mostly durable, but like they do miss some games. And I don't think you just assume they're going to play 17 games each. So if things go awry enough where one of those guys misses and they don't have a free safety they trust, it's gonna undo everything that's happening with Kwity Paye and Latu. And it doesn't matter how well you can stop the run if no one runs on you. Like it's just, I think it's the hesitance you might have towards signing one of these guys right now is like, that feels like an all-in move. Like we're going to chase the ceiling Super Bowl with one of these guys. Like, are we ready to do that? To me, it's more about the floor. It's just like, we're going to make sure our secondary doesn't kill us. And if you sign Justin Simmons or Quandre Diggs with Julian Blackmon and Kenny Moore, your secondary is not going to get you killed. So that's the biggest argument I think there is for it, is like, let's set ourselves up to be able to achieve everything we want to achieve this year and not have one part of the team that just erases that. The way that 2 years ago, the offensive line was so bad that it didn't matter anything that happened on that defense. Didn't matter if Alec Pierce had a big rookie year. Didn't matter if Michael Pittman Jr. took a step. Didn't matter how much ultimately Matt Ryan had left in the tank, because they built a team around an offensive line. It wasn't any good. And this year it's a little different. They're not building it around the secondary, but the league is. The league is all about the passing game. So I don't know, they better hope that they're able to cover some people better than the last time they had a Julian Blackmon injury against the Texans was not the most encouraging sign. So there it is.
There it is. You have sufficiently been warned, Colts fans. For the IndyStar, I'm Joel A. Erickson. This has been Nate Atkins and the Colts Cover-2 Podcast. Eyes on the free safety position going forward in training camp.